If you were to take a dart and throw it at a map of the world's major economic hubs, New York, London, Sydney, Vancouver, or Paris, you would inevitably land on a city defined by a single, crushing crisis: the cost of housing. We have become accustomed to a narrative that frames this crisis as an inevitable side effect of urban success. We are told, time and again, that in great cities, demand will always outstrip supply. We are told that space is finite, that land is a fixed resource, and that prices must, by the laws of physics and economics, rise into the stratosphere. It is presented as the price of admission for civilization's greatest engines of commerce. If a city is safe, wealthy, and desirable, then it must, by definition, be unaffordable. But if you look to East Asia, to two of the most significant high-density megacities on the planet, you find a tale of two capitals that completely shatters this conventional wisdom. On one side of the Sea of Japan lies Tokyo. It is the largest metropolitan area in the history of the human species. It is the economic engine of the world's fourth largest economy. It is dense, it is crowded, and it is undeniably desirable. And yet, for the last 20 years, the rental market in Tokyo has achieved something that seems mathematically impossible in the West: stability. In Tokyo, a waiter earning a standard service industry wage can still afford a clean 20-square-meter studio apartment within the 23 wards without needing a roommate, a feat of solvency that has all but vanished in London or New York. On the other side of the water lies Seoul. On paper, it is Tokyo's twin. It is the undisputed heart of the South Korean economy, housing nearly half the nation's population in its metro area. While it faces a tougher geographic challenge, nestled in a basin of granite mountains, rather than sitting on a flat plain like Tokyo, it faces the same catastrophic birth rate collapse and the same aging population. Yet, Seoul exists in an entirely different economic universe. Here, the housing market is described by locals simply as impossible. Prices are surging at rates that baffle economists. Young professionals are drowning in world-leading levels of debt, and the average apartment price in the central districts now rivals the most exclusive neighborhoods of Manhattan. The difference between these two outcomes isn't a matter of geography. It isn't a matter of demand. And it certainly isn't a matter of luck. It is a matter of power. It is a story about two radically different choices made by two different governments when faced with the same fundamental problem. In 2002, Japan made a quiet, technical decision that terrified local homeowners. It decided that the right to build was more important than the right to block. It took the power of zoning away from local neighbors and gave it to the central state. Across the strait, Seoul chose the opposite path. It chose to protect the assets of the existing homeowners, trapping its development behind a green belt of artificial scarcity and a political system that prioritizes the preservation of wealth over the creation of homes. This is the story of how Tokyo solved the housing crisis by treating homes like cars, and how Seoul exacerbated it by treating homes like gold. This is the logistics of living. To understand the scale of the anomaly that is Tokyo, we first have to look at the numbers, because they simply do not make sense in the context of modern urban economics. The 23 special wards of Tokyo, the core of the city, are home to approximately 9.7 million people. The population density here hovers around 41,000 people per square mile. That is more than double the density of San Francisco. In a city this dense, in a country this wealthy, economic theory suggests that rent should be skyrocketing as people compete for space. But it isn't. For the last 20 years, rent in Tokyo has remained effectively flat. In fact, the market is so stable that even minor fluctuations create headlines. In late 2024, while asking rents for brand new units finally began to creep up by 3 to 4% due to construction costs, the official consumer price index for existing tenants barely moved, showing rent increases that were effectively negligible. In London or New York, such stability would be considered a miracle. In Tokyo, the slight uptick in new listing prices made news simply because it was the first significant movement in decades. To put this in human terms, consider the purchasing power of a service worker. In 2024, a full-time waiter in Tokyo earns a gross annual salary of approximately 2.6 million yen to 3 million yen. That converts to roughly $18,000 to $20,000 USD. In almost any other Tier 1 global city, this salary is a ticket to poverty. It would require a roommate situation in a distant suburb, a grueling 2-hour commute, or a specialized housing subsidy. But in Tokyo, that waiter can find a studio apartment in the city center, in desirable wards like Shinjuku or Nakano, for around 75,000 yen to 85,000 yen per month. That is roughly 500 to 600 US dollars. It won't be a palace. It might be 20 square meters. But it is there. It is accessible. In the private market, it requires no lottery, no waiting list, and no government intervention. Now, contrast this with the reality across the Tsushima Strait. In Seoul, the market is currently in a state of violent expansion. In November 2025, apartment sale prices in Seoul surged by 1.72%. Not in a year, in a single month. Annualized, that is a catastrophic explosion in the cost of living. This marked the 18th consecutive month of aggressive increases. According to data from recent market reports, the average price of an apartment in the prestigious Gangnam districts of Seoul has reached an eye-watering $22,875 per square meter. To put that in perspective, a modest 800-square-foot condominium in these desirable zones would cost roughly 1.7 million US dollars. Even looking at the broader Seoul average, prices hover near $900,000, meaning the city is among the most expensive in the world relative to income, surpassing the notoriously expensive markets of London and New York in terms of affordability burden. The disparity is best illustrated by the Samsung standard. In South Korea, working for Samsung is the pinnacle of middle-class achievement. In 2024, the average annual salary for a Samsung engineer reached approximately 128 million won, or nearly 89,000 US dollars. This is a fantastic income, nearly quadruple that of the Tokyo waiter. And yet, this engineer struggles to afford a home. The mortgage-to-income ratio for a median household in Seoul has hit 154%. The average family now owes substantially more than its annual disposable income just to keep a roof over their heads. So, how did two cities that started from such similar post-war baselines diverge so dramatically? To find the answer, we have to go back to a time when Tokyo was the expensive one. It is difficult to overstate just how insane the Japanese real estate market was in the late 1980s. This was the era of the bubble economy. Japan was the envy of the world, its tech was dominating, and its land prices were defying logic. At the height of the frenzy in 1989, it was famously calculated that the land beneath the Imperial Palace in central Tokyo, a plot of roughly 1.15 square kilometers, was worth more than all the real estate in the entire state of California combined. When that bubble burst in the early 1990s, it didn't just lower prices, it shattered the Japanese economy. It kicked off what is known as the lost decade, a period of stagnation and deflation. But in the ashes of that disaster, the Japanese government found the political capital to do something that is almost impossible in a booming economy. They completely rewrote the rules of who owns the sky. The response, led by the administration of Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi in the early 2000s, was a massive deregulation campaign designed to jumpstart the economy through construction. They didn't need to invent a new system. The as-of-right framework had existed since 1950, but they needed to weaponize it. The government realized that the only way to get the economy moving was to build, and the only way to build was to crush the NIMBYs, the not-in-my-backyard activists who block development to preserve their property values. The cornerstone of this effort was the Urban Renaissance Special Measure Law of 2002. While the name sounds like typical bureaucratic word salad, the law represented a fundamental rescaling of governance power. It established the Urban Renaissance headquarters within the cabinet itself, giving the federal government, not the city, not the ward, and certainly not the neighborhood association, the authority to designate priority urban development areas. In most Western countries, and indeed in South Korea, the power to zone land is almost always local. It belongs to municipal councils, which are elected by the very people who already live there. These existing residents have a vested financial interest in blocking new supply. If you own a home, you generally want housing to be scarce so that your asset appreciates. They use tools like character studies, environmental impact reviews, and shadow studies to delay or kill new apartments. Japan's 2002 reform effectively bypassed this entire mechanism. It reinforced a concept known as of right development. As of right is the magic phrase that makes Tokyo function. It means that if a developer submits a plan that meets the objective, written criteria of the zone, the local government must approve it. They cannot say no because the building is ugly. They cannot say no because the neighbors are worried about neighborhood character or traffic. They cannot say no because the building doesn't match the vibe of the existing homes. While they must respect strict mathematical angles to preserve sunlight, they cannot stop the building's existence based on community opinion. If it meets the code, it gets built. By centralizing this power, Japan stripped the veto from the NIMBYs. Because the rules are set at the national level by the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism, MLIT, they are insulated from the particularist pressures of local homeowners. A bureaucrat in the federal ministry does not care if Mrs. Tanaka in Setagaya Ward is upset about the new apartment building blocking her view of Mount Fuji. The bureaucrat cares about the national GDP and housing supply. By moving the decision up the chain, Japan ensured that the needs of the many, the future renters, outweighed the desires of the few, the current owners. The result is a city that is constantly molting. In Tokyo, the cityscape is never finished. It is a chaotic, churning cycle of destruction and creation. Low-density single-family homes are constantly being torn down and replaced with 6-story apartment blocks. Small apartment blocks are replaced with high-rise towers. There is no sentimentality about preserving neighborhood character, because the character of Tokyo is change. This unleashed a construction boom where supply is capable of meeting demand in real time. But the speed of approval is only half the equation. The other half is what you are allowed to build. In most Western cities, and largely in Seoul, zoning is Euclidean. This term comes from a U.S. Supreme Court case, Village of Euclid versus Ambler Realty Company, which established the practice of strictly separating uses. You have a zone for sleeping, residential, a zone for working, commercial, and a zone for making things, industrial. If you try to put a corner store in a residential zone, you are breaking the law. This separation creates the need for cars, massive roads, and parking lots, which eat up valuable land that could be used for housing. Japan uses a different philosophy: maximum nuisance zoning. Instead of telling you exactly what you must do, the law tells you the worst thing you are allowed to do. It's a hierarchy, a cascade. There are only 13 zones for the entire country, standardized from the snowy north of Hokkaido to the tropical islands of Okinawa. At the top of the hierarchy is Category 1 low-rise residential. This is the strictest zone. You cannot build a high-rise here. But even in this quietest, most protected designation, you are generally allowed to build a small shop, a clinic, or a combined home and office. As you move down the list to Category 2, the restrictions loosen rapidly, allowing apartment blocks to rise next to single-family homes. The key is the cascade. If a zone allows a department store, it automatically allows everything less annoying than a department store, including apartments. Here is the kicker. Housing is allowed in every single zone in Japan except for one. You can build an apartment building in a commercial zone. You can build a house in a quasi-industrial zone next to a small factory. There is no such thing as an exclusive single-family home zone in the way American suburbs understand it. Even in the quietest residential areas of Tokyo, you have the right to build a small shop or a duplex. This mixed-use by default philosophy creates a virtuous cycle of density. Because you can put a convenience store or a small office in a residential neighborhood, people don't need cars to get their daily necessities. Because they don't need cars, developers don't need to build parking spots. Because they don't need parking spots, they can fit more housing units onto the same plot of land. This density supports the world's most efficient train system, which further reduces the need for cars. It is an ecosystem of efficiency that allows Tokyo to fit 14 million people into a space that, in the US, might house 2 million. In 2014, the city of Tokyo, with a population of 13.3 million, issued 142,417 housing starts. To put that in perspective, the entire state of California, with a population nearly 3 times larger at 38.7 million, issued only 83,657 housing permits that same year. Tokyo builds more in a single city than California builds in an entire state. And because the city is constantly rebuilding itself, the supply always meets the demand. Even in fiscal year 2023, a year where Japan saw a 7.0% decline in national housing starts, the Greater Tokyo area still produced 286,709 new units. While Tokyo was busy deregulating, creating this hyper-flexible federalized machine of construction, Seoul was doing the exact opposite. Seoul is a city defined by its constraints. Geographically, it is a basin surrounded by granite mountains. But the most formidable wall around Seoul is not made of rock, it is made of ink. It is the Green Belt. Officially known as Restricted Development Zones, RDZ, the Green Belt was established in 1971 by the military government of Park Chung-hee. The stated goals were noble: to prevent the disorderly sprawl of the city, to protect the environment, and, critically for the time, to maintain a defensive buffer against North Korea, which sits just 30 miles to the north. On paper, the Greenbelt is a triumph of environmentalism. It preserved nature in a rapidly industrializing nation. In reality, the Greenbelt has acted as a noose around the neck of the city's housing market. Because the city cannot expand continuously, development was forced to leapfrog the green zone, creating new towns far on the periphery. This forces millions of people to commute across a preserved belt of nature to get to their jobs in the center, while the core supply remains artificially capped. It has unambiguously raised land prices within the city limits, enriching those who bought early and punishing those who were born late. The South Korean government has attempted to mitigate this by releasing small portions of the Greenbelt. Between 2000 and 2010, approximately 134 square kilometers of Greenbelt land in the Seoul metropolitan area was released for development. However, economic research shows that this deregulation often has a negative or insignificant effect on prices in the central city, while actually increasing prices in the suburbs as it signals a shift toward higher value development. Speculators rush in, buying up land in anticipation of further releases, driving prices up before a single brick is laid. The scarcity is so acute that it has paralyzed the political system. In January 2026, a public war of words erupted between the Seoul city government and the Federal Ministry of Land. The federal government, desperate to lower prices, proposed supplying 60,000 homes on idle public land, including the Taerung Country Club and the Yongsan International Business District. The Seoul city government slammed the plan. They argued that converting Greenbelt sites like Taeryung offered minimal housing supply benefits compared to the environmental cost, and that the government should instead focus on easing reconstruction regulations for existing aging urban areas. This bureaucratic gridlock is the opposite of the Japanese as-of-right model. In Seoul, zoning is a political weapon used by different levels of government to signal environmental virtue or protect local interests, while the supply of housing remains choked. But legal structures and zoning maps are only the surface. To truly understand why Tokyo and Seoul are different, we have to look at the soul of the housing market. We have to look at what a house is to the people who buy it. And this brings us to the most fundamental split between the two cultures: the philosophy of the asset. In Tokyo, a house is like a car. It is a consumer good. You buy it, you use it, it wears out, and eventually, it is worth nothing. In Japan, buildings lose value almost the moment they are completed. The depreciation schedule is brutal. After 20 years, a wooden house is often valued at zero. After 30 years, even concrete condos lose the vast majority of their book value. This is partly due to the scrap-and-build culture where buyers prefer brand-new construction that meets the latest earthquake codes. A house built before 1981 is not vintage. It is a seismic risk that likely needs to be demolished. This mindset, known as wabi-sabi, the beauty of impermanence, has a hidden economic gift: freedom. When your home isn't an investment vehicle, you don't care if a neighbor builds a taller building next door. You don't care if the character of the neighborhood changes, because your wealth isn't tied to the neighborhood's exclusivity. You are free to live in your home as a utility, a place of shelter and comfort, rather than a financial instrument. In South Korea, the reality is the opposite. A house is not a car. A house is a stock. It is a speculative asset that must go up. For the South Korean middle class, real estate is the alpha and the omega of wealth. As of 2024, approximately 75% of South Korean household wealth is invested in real estate. Among the top 1% of households, real estate accounts for 79.4% of total assets. In the United States, by comparison, roughly 35% of household wealth is in real estate, with the rest in stocks, bonds, and retirement accounts. In Japan, households hold a massive percentage of their wealth in cash and deposits. This creates what economists call the asset class trap. If housing prices in Seoul were to drop to affordable levels, say a 40% correction, the Korean middle class would effectively go bankrupt. Their retirement accounts would vanish. They would be underwater on their mortgages. The consumption economy would collapse because no one would feel rich enough to spend money. This makes affordable housing politically impossible. No politician, left or right, can win an election by promising to destroy 75% of their voters' net worth. As a result, the South Korean government is politically addicted to expensive housing. They might talk about lowering prices, they might pass token measures, but deep down, the system is designed to keep prices high to protect the retirement accounts of the aging population. This addiction is supercharged by a unique Korean institution called the Jeonse system. Jeonse is a rental arrangement found almost nowhere else on Earth. Instead of paying monthly rent, a tenant lends the landlord a massive lump sum deposit, often 50% to 80% of the property's value, at the start of the lease. The landlord keeps this money for 2 years, invests it, and then returns the principal to the tenant when they move out. On paper, the tenant lives rent-free. In reality, most young tenants must borrow this massive deposit from a bank. They simply swap paying rent to a landlord for paying interest to a bank. This works when interest rates are low, but when rates rise, the free apartment suddenly becomes a financial burden. In an era of high interest rates and rising prices, this system acts as rocket fuel for speculation. It allows landlords to buy multiple properties with very little of their own money, using the Jeonse deposits from one tenant to buy the next house. This is known as gap investment. Let's say you have $100,000. You want to buy a $500,000 apartment. You find a tenant who will pay a $400,000 Jeonse deposit. You take the tenant's $400,000, add your $100,000, and buy the apartment. You now own a $500,000 asset for only $100,000 down. Then, you do it again. You leverage the equity to buy another. Some gap investors in Seoul accumulated hundreds of properties using this leverage. This works wonderfully when prices are rising. But when prices wobble, or when interest rates rise, the whole house of cards shakes. If the market price drops, the next tenant might only offer a $350,000 deposit. The landlord is $50,000 short. They cannot pay back the original tenant. The tenant loses their life savings. This is exactly what has happened in recent years, leading to a wave of Jeonse fraud and tragedy. But it also reveals the structural rot at the heart of the system. The entire market is built on the assumption that prices will always go up. By 2025, South Korean household debt reached approximately $1.34 trillion, roughly 1,900 trillion won, or roughly 105% of GDP, one of the highest levels in the world. The average family now owes nearly twice its annual disposable income. This debt is the fuel for the housing market. If the bubble bursts, if the real estate assets that make up 75% of wealth lose their value, the Korean middle class faces a total wipeout. The human cost of these two different models is stark. In Tokyo, the supply flood means that a part-time worker can still afford a roof over their head. In late 2025, the minimum wage in Tokyo reached a new historic high of 1,226 yen per hour. A full-time minimum wage worker now earns a gross annual income of approximately 2.55 million yen, $17,500. While rent in central Tokyo is expensive, around 40 to 50% of this income, the mixed-use miracle means that cheaper housing is always available in the next ward over, just a 20-minute train ride away. In Seoul, the Samsung engineer, the pinnacle of the Korean middle class, is finding that their high salary is functionally blunt. In 2024, the average annual salary for an employee at Samsung Electronics reached approximately 128 million won, $88,930. This is a fantastic salary, but it is meaningless in the face of Seoul's real estate market. The average price of a central apartment in Seoul is now $22,875 per square meter. For a modest 25 square meter unit, roughly 270 square feet, the price is approximately $571,000. To buy a family-sized home, the engineer is looking at over $1.5 million. According to data from the NIMBY Property Investment Index and local banking reports, it takes a Seoulite with a median income approximately 25 to 30 years of saving 100% of their income to purchase a median home. For a resident of Tokyo, that number is closer to 11 to 13 years. While Tokyo is not cheap by historical standards, the gap is massive. The timeline in Seoul suggests that for an average worker, the concept of home ownership has mathematically ceased to exist. The Samsung engineer isn't just fighting high prices, they are fighting a system of gap investment and corruption. In 2025, a senior policymaker, the first vice land minister, was forced to resign after it was revealed he used gap investment to buy a 3.35 billion won apartment in the IT hub of Pangyo, financing nearly half of it with a tenant's deposit. This do as I say, not as I buy behavior from the ruling class has reinforced the belief among ordinary Koreans that real estate is the only viable path to wealth, creating a speculative frenzy that no salary can outpace.